Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. The river moves quietly, as if it carries nothing but water from the bank. You see only the things you expect: reflections of clouds, a slow swirl of leaves, the way light bends where the current changes depth. But rivers are more than what you see. They are mirrors, storerooms, messengers. They carry the memory of every place they have touched, every drop of rain they have swallowed, every fragment of life they have passed. And now, woven invisibly into that memory is something new: the faint, lingering presence of human medicine. Molecules without form. These medicines do not travel like bottles on a boat. They are broken down, scattered into molecules so small they cannot be seen even in the clearest water. They do not change the color of the river. They do not cloud it, do not give off a scent, do not ripple differently from any other part of the flow. But they are their tiny chemical notes, drifting in a song of water and silt, passing under bridges, through reeds, round the ankles of waiting birds. The river's invisible passengers. You could take a jar, fill it with river water, hold it up to the sunlight, and see nothing unusual. And yet, if you looked closer than the human eye allows, you would find traces of amoxicillin, or ciprofloxacin, or other names from the long list of antibiotics we have woven into modern life. Some came from hospitals, some from clinics, some from the homes of people who never thought about where their medicines might go after the body had used what it could. A pharmacy with no doors. The river has become a pharmacy without walls, open to every creature that passes through. The minnows in the shallows, the snails on the stones, the algae in the eddies, all live in the same flow. All are brushed by the same invisible touch. These antibiotics were made for humans, measured for our bodies, our illnesses, our bacteria. But once they are in the river, there is no distinction. They touch everything. An old world meets a new force. Bacteria have been here for billions of years, long before humans made rivers run through cities, long before medicine was even an idea. They have lived in the guts of fish, in the slime, on rocks, in the mud that the river stirs and settles again. They are used to change. They have survived ice ages, meteor impacts, and shifts in the chemistry of the earth itself. But now they face something different, a chemical designed not just to slow them, but to kill them. Resistance begins in silence. The first time a bacterium meets an antibiotic, it may die, but not all do. Some have small differences, a twist in a protein, slightly stronger cell wall, a way of pushing the chemical out before it can do harm. These survivors carry their success in their DNA, and in the river, there is no isolation. Every stone, every route, every particle of silt is a meeting place. A bacterium that survives shares what it knows, not through words, but through genes, passing them like a key from one to another. The current, as a messenger water, is not just a home, it is a road. A bacterium that learns to survive does not stay in one place. It moves downstream, carried past reed beds and fishing lines, past towns that do not know its name, past estuaries where fresh water meets salt. It can travel farther than any creature its size should, 'cause the river does not tire, does not stop. A story without a witness. Most of this happens where no one is watching. There's no drama to see, no sudden clouding of the water, no signpost that says, here begins the making of a superbug. The change is molecular, quiet, persistent. And so, the river keeps flowing, its surface calm, its depths busy with an evolution that few will ever notice until its effects rise to the surface of human life. The river, as a mirror of us, what the river carries is not just its own story. It reflects ours, the ways we have learned to heal ourselves, the ways we have forgotten to close the circle of care. Every antibiotic we have ever made was born from the idea that illness could be fought, that life could be lengthened. But the river shows us another side of the same act, that our tools do not vanish when we are done with them, and that nature does not always use them as we intend. In ancient patience meets a modern speed. Bacteria work on a scale of generations that can be measured in minutes, where we see a year pass. They have lived through thousands of lifetimes, and each lifetime is a chance, a test of whether they can live in water that now contains a chemical meant to end them. Our medicines are young in comparison, barely a century old, but in that short time, we have spread them far and wide, turning rivers into quiet laboratories for the evolution of resistance. A current that knows no borders. The molecules do not stop at county lines or national borders. If the river runs to the sea, they go with it, joining currents that wrap the globe. A gene for resistance learned in a shallow stream in Yorkshire can eventually meet bacteria in waters far away, in ports, in shipping lanes, in the ballast tanks of vessels that cross oceans. The hidden pharmacy of one small river is, in time, connected to the pharmacy of the world. The weight of what we cannot see. It is easy to think of pollution as something heavy: oil, slicks, plastic bottles, a tangle of fishing nets in the tide. But this pollution is weightless to the eye. It drifts without leaving a shadow. It can pass through filters not built for it, settle into places we never meant it to be. Its danger is not in what it is now, but in what it teaches. A question for the future: if the river has learned to carry our medicines, and the bacteria within it have learned to survive them, what happens next? Do we learn to clean the water in ways we never had to before? Do we change the way we use the medicines themselves? Or do we wait until the bacteria return to us in forms we can no longer treat? The answers are not in the river alone. They are in how we listen to what it is telling us now. Not all medicine ends its journey in the body. Some of it leaves quietly, slipping away in forms we do not notice, tiny remnants of pills, traces from syrups, echoes from injections. The human body is a master at using what it needs, but it is not perfect at keeping everything. Some of what we take stays with us until the illness passes, but much of it leaves, not as the bottle or the tablet we once held, but as invisible fragments woven into the water we send away. The long road to the river, it begins in the bathroom. A glass of water, a tablet swallowed, a moment of trust in science. Hours later, our bodies have done their work, absorbed the chemical, sent it where it was needed, and passed the rest along to be discarded. We flush, and the medicine begins its second journey. Down the pipes it goes, joining water from kitchens and showers, meeting detergents, soaps, and all the other traces of human life that flow unseen beneath our feet. The first gate, wastewater treatment. Before it reaches the open river, the water arrives at a treatment plant. Out here, machines churn, filters strain, bacteria eat away at organic waste. It is a place of engineering precision. Giant settling tanks, clarifiers, screens that pull out solids before the water moves on. And yet, these plants were never built for molecules like antibiotics. They can catch what they can see, break down what can be digested, but the smallest chemical traces slip through as if the nets were never there. A filter built for another age, when most of these treatment systems were designed. The idea of medicine and water was not something anyone planned for. Pollution was smoke from chimneys. Oil on the surface of harbors, factory waste you could smell from the shore. But antibiotics are ghosts in the water, colorless, scentless, able to pass through the layers of sand, charcoal, and membrane that stop so many other things. They do not vanish. They simply keep moving. The quiet merge once past the treatment plant. The water flows back into the river. From a distance, it is clean, clear enough to reflect the sky, cool enough to hold fish, swift enough to carry boats. But now it carries a new passenger, molecules that have already done their work in a human body and now drift toward the sea. There is no ceremony to mark their arrival. No warning sign stands where the treated water enters the flow. 'Tis just another meeting of currents, river water and city water, blending into one other roads to the river knot. All medicine reaches the water through treatment plants. Sometimes the journey is shorter, less filtered. On farms, antibiotics used for livestock can pass into manure, and from there into runoff when rain falls hard in rural places. Septic tanks may overflow in storms, sending traces of medicine into ditches and streams that feed larger rivers, and sometimes it is even simpler. A bottle emptied into a sink, a handful of pills tossed away and dissolved by rain. Every route is different, but they all end in the same place. The water that winds its way to the sea. Rain, as a carrier rain, is the great mover in this story. When it falls on city streets, it sweeps along dust, oil, and tiny fragments of everything left in the open dot in fields. It pulls water-soluble chemicals from the soil, slipping them into the drainage channels that lead to streams. The rain does not distinguish between the harmless and the potent. It carries everything forward, as if its only task is to keep the world moving. What the eye cannot follow, even if you stood on a bridge and watched the water below. You cannot trace a single molecule of medicine. It does not form clouds in the water or streaks on the surface. It is part of the liquid itself, indistinguishable to the senses. And yet it changes the very nature of the river for the creatures that live in it. The river's first. Students, the bacteria in the river do not know where the medicine came from. They do not care that it was meant for humans or for animals far upstream. They simply meet it. They have met every change the water has carried before. Nutrients from soil, chemicals from factories, heat from industrial discharge. Some are harmed immediately. Others are slowed. A few discover, by chance, that they can survive it. These few become the teachers, passing their genetic advantage to their neighbors, turning a moment of survival into a community's new strength. The accumulation of the invisible. The more often the river receives these medicines, the more lessons the bacteria learn. It is not a sudden transformation. It is quiet, gradual, a series of tiny changes building over seasons and years. One rainy winter may carry more than usual. A drought may concentrate what is already there. By the time anyone measures, the river has already been a classroom for generations of microbial life. Why the flow never forgets. Once in the river, the medicine does not always break down quickly. Some antibiotics can linger for weeks, even months, especially in cooler water. They move with the current, but they also settle in silt, cling to plant roots, become part of the thin biofilms that coat rocks and reeds. From there, they can be released again when the water warms or when floods stir the bottom. The river is not just a highway, it is a library, storing what passes through. From river to human. Again, the cycle can turn back on itself. Water drawn from rivers is often treated and returned to homes as drinking water. The levels of antibiotics are far below what could treat an infection, but they are enough to touch bacteria in our bodies, to give them the same lessons learned in the shallows. Food can carry the cycle. 2 vegetables grown with river water, fish that lived where antibiotics drift. The loop closes, and what began as medicine for one person can return, altered, to another. The unseen responsibility. Most of us do not think about where our medicine goes after it has done its work. We picture it fading away, disappearing into the vastness of the system designed to carry waste away. But the river is not a bottomless sink. It is a living thing, and what we give to it does not vanish without a trace. A map made of water, if you could follow a drop of water from the moment it leaves a tap to the moment it meets the sea, you would see the story unfold from bathroom pipes to sewers to treatment plants to outflows in quiet bends of the river. Each step adds something: soap, warmth, rain, silt, but the antibiotic remains, riding along without pause. By the time it reaches the sea, it has touched countless lives that will never know its name. Beneath the moving surface of the river, a world thrives that most will never notice. It is older than the cities on its banks, older than the first bricks ever laid beside it, older even than the rivers themselves. The river's hidden citizens are small beyond imagining, so small that hundreds could fit inside the dot of an eye on the page you are reading now. They are not fish, nor plants, nor anything you could point to with a fingertip. They are bacteria, the planet's original engineers, its oldest storytellers, and, in their own way, its quietest survivors. The first inhabitants of Earth long before humans spoke, before animals walked on land, before plants greened the continents. Bacteria ruled the earth. In warm, shallow seas, they learned to turn sunlight into energy. In deep, dark vents, they learned to draw power from stone and metal. When oxygen was still rare, they found ways to live without it. When oxygen became plentiful, they learned to use it better than any other creature. Through every catastrophe, volcanic winters, ice ages, asteroid strikes, they endured. In every era, they adapted faster than the world could change around them. The river as a microbial city. You could shrink yourself down to the scale of a bacterium and drift with the river's current. You would see no empty space. Every pebble, every grain of sand, every thin blade of underwater grass would be covered in life. Some bacteria cling to rocks, forming slippery films that glisten in the light when the water is shallow. Others float free, riding the flow like plankton, drifting wherever the current takes them. Still others live inside tiny pockets, hollow stems, snail shells, microscopic spaces between grains of silt. Here, quote, the river is not just a body of water. It is a vast and complex city with neighborhoods, marketplaces, and highways invisible to the naked eye. The endless work they do. Bacteria are the river's caretakers. They break down fallen leaves, turning them into nutrients that feed plants and fish. They strip nitrogen from the air and lock it into forms other life can use. They clean waste that flows from the land, transforming dangerous compounds into harmless elements. Every breath the river takes, every change in its chemistry, passes through the hands of these tiny workers. Their constant state of change. Bacteria have no childhood, no old age in the way we know it. They are born by dividing in two. One cell becomes two, two become four, and so on. For some species, this doubling can happen in less than 20 minutes. In a single day, a colony can pass through dozens of generations, each one slightly different. From the last dot, this speed gives them a power few other creatures possess: the ability to adapt to threats almost as quickly as those threats appear. Meeting the medicine. When antibiotics entered the river, the bacteria meet them without ceremony. Some encounter a dose strong enough to kill them instantly. Others meet only a faint trace, not enough to destroy them, but enough to slow their growth, to test their ability to endure. In this microscopic world, every encounter is a gamble. Some cells will die, others will barely survive, and a few will discover that they carry a small change in their structure, a change that makes them immune. The passing of a secret for bacteria. Survival is not a solitary act. When one cell finds a way to endure a danger, it can share this ability with others, even those of a different species. They do this by exchanging tiny loops of DNA, as if handing each other the pages of a survival manual. A single resistant bacterium can pass its knowledge to dozens of others in hours. Those dozens can pass it on to thousands in a matter of days. In this way, what begins as an accident becomes a widespread defense, a new chapter in the river's microbial history. The balance that once was for most of Earth's history, bacteria, lived in balance with the world around them. Predators, teeny protozoa, kept their numbers in check. Viruses that infect only bacteria, known as bacteriophages, pruned their populations like gardeners trimming a hedge. Even when they developed resistance to one natural threat, another would rise to challenge them. But human-made antibiotics tilted the balance. They were more powerful than most natural toxins, and they appeared suddenly, in doses and patterns that the river's ecosystem had never seen before. The rise of the few in this new environment, bacteria that could resist antibiotics, gained an advantage greater than any they had known. While their neighbors weakened or died, they grew unchecked. They spread into niches once held by other species, changing the very makeup of the river's community, and, as they multiplied, carried their resistance with them, a trait now woven into the fabric of the river's life. The bacteria that travel the creatures in the river are not confined to it. Bacteria can cling to the feet of birds, the fur of otters, the shells of turtles. They can drift into the air on sprays of water where the river splashes over rocks. They can hitch a ride on boats, nets, or the hands of people who wade into fish. Once they leave, they can settle into new waters, new soils, new hosts. A resistant bacterium born in a single bend of a rural stream can one day appear hundreds of miles away in a city's drinking water supply. Their indifference to us it's tempting to think of these creatures as enemies or allies, but they are neither. They do not resist antibiotics to spite us. They do not adapt for our benefit. They simply exist, seeking to survive, guessed as they have for billions of years. The fact that their survival sometimes threatens ours is not part of their intention. It is simply the crossing of two paths on a shared planet. The vastness of the unseen for every drop of water in the river. There are millions of bacteria. They live in numbers that make human populations seem like small gatherings, and yet, despite their overwhelming presence, they remain invisible to the casual eye, a reminder that the most powerful forces in nature are often the ones we never see directly. The tipping point resistance is not new to bacteria in the soil, in the oceans. They have been trading defense mechanisms for hundreds of millions of years, but the river's constant supply of human antibiotics is something else entirely, a challenge without pause, a test without end. With each passing day, more of them learn the answers, until the balance of power shifts in ways we may not be able to reverse. The river's oldest residents is changed forever. The creatures we do not see will outlive the cities on the shore. They will endure the collapse of cliffs, the silting of harbors, the rise and fall of human empires, but they will not be the same as they were before our medicine entered their world. They carry our fingerprints now. In the loops of DNA, they pass among themselves an inheritance they never asked for, but one they'll keep for as long as they flow in the water. If you follow a river upstream, past its winding bends and quiet stretches, you will often find it narrowing, the banks drawing close, the water darkening with the shade of overhanging branches. Then, in a place where the hum of traffic fades and the smell of wet stone is heavy in the air, you may find a pipe. It is not large, just a concrete mouth set into the bank, half hidden by grass and bramble. From it, water spills in a steady ribbon, joining the river without ceremony. The water is not the color of rain. It carries a faint sheen when the sunlight touches it, and a smell that is not of the forest or the field, a smell faintly chemical, faintly human. The lifeline. No one notices this pipe is one of thousands, part of a network that most people never see. From the houses of the town, from its hospitals, schools, and restaurants. Water runs into drains, through sinks, showers, washing machines, toilets, and floor grates. It gathers in underground channels, in dark tunnels that carry the day's waste toward a single point. There, at the edge of the town, the wastewater treatment plant waits taught to most. It is only a cluster of low buildings and open basins behind chain-link fences. But inside those fences, every drop of water from the community passes through a series of transformations. Solids are settled out. Grease and oil are skimmed away. The remaining water is filtered and aerated, encouraged to break down its load of organic matter. But there is one thing these systems were not. It's built to remove the smallest chemical shadows of the medicines we take. The persistence of the invisible. When someone swallows an antibiotic, not all of it is absorbed by the body. Some of it passes unchanged into the bloodstream and out again through the kidneys, key bound for the toilet bowl in hospitals. The same happens at a larger scale. Patients taking strong antibiotics for infections that threaten their lives, shedding traces of those drugs into the waste stream every day. Even in farms, where animals are given antibiotics to keep them healthy or to grow faster. Manure from barns can enter the wastewater system or be washed by rain into streams. The treatment plant was not designed to capture these molecules. They are too small, too stable. They slip through filters meant for particles, through biological systems meant for breaking down food waste. And so, after hours of processing, the clean water clear, odorless, safe by every standard written decades ago, still carries the faint chemical fingerprints of modern life. From discharge to driftwood, the plant releases its treated water. It joins the river without pause. The molecules of antibiotics are diluted, yes, but they do not vanish. Bacterium, clinging to a pebble in the shallows, may encounter just enough of the drug to feel its effect. Not enough to kill outright, but enough to stress, enough to force adaptation. The river becomes a slow-moving classroom, and the bacteria become eager students, where the old meets the new in many parts of the United Kingdom. The infrastructure for wastewater treatment is decades old. It was built in an age when few imagined medicines could flow back into the environment. In those days, water quality was measured in terms of visible pollution, the absence of foul smells, clarity of the flow, the safety for fish and swimmers. Antibiotics were not part of the equation, and so the pipes and basins, the filters and pumps do their work faithfully, removing the things they were built to remove, while the invisible passes through unhindered. The downstream effect, downstream from a discharge pipe, the river may appear unchanged. Its surface will still catch the light. Birds will still alight on its banks. Children may still play in the shallows, turning over stones to find crayfish and minnows, but the bacteria beneath those stones are not the same as those upstream. Studies have shown that in the stretches of river below wastewater treatment plants, the proportion of antibiotic-resistant bacteria is significantly higher. It is not that the discharge creates bacteria from nothing. They were already there, woven into the river's ecology. But here, they are sharpened, selected, and spread. When water travels further than we think, a river's journey does not end in its own channel. Water from the discharge may be drawn downstream for irrigation. It may seep into groundwater that feeds wells. Some rivers eventually flow into reservoirs that supply drinking water to other towns, although that water will be treated again. The trace molecules of antibiotics are often still detectable, even after multiple stages of purification, and while the concentrations are low. Their presence is enough to keep the quiet selection process, running, generation after generation of bacteria learning to endure. The unseen migration. It's tempting to think of the resistant bacteria as bound to the river, their influence ending at the water's edge. But they are travelers. They can hitch a ride on the feet of birds that wade through the shallows, okay? On the fur of animals that come to drink, on the hulls of boats, on the fishing lines of anglers. A single droplet clinging to a boot sole can carry them to another body of water. From there, they may meet new species, share their resistance genes, okay, and continue the spread. The human threshold wastewater treatment plants are often located out of sight at the margins of towns. Their work is quiet, reliable. Most people never think about them, but here, at the edge of the community, it's one of the great gateways of modern disease ecology. Every improvement made to these SYSTEMS, every filter capable of capturing pharmaceuticals, every step that breaks down the molecules before they reach the river is not just an upgrade to infrastructure, it is a defense line for the future. Because the river does not need to run black with pollution to be dangerous. It only needs to carry what we cannot see. It begins, always, in silence. There is no flash, no signal to mark the change. The river does not ripple. The surface does not tremble. Somewhere beneath the water, in the thin film of life coating a stone, one bacterium divides, just as it has done thousands of times before, but this time, in the endless rearranging of its tiny blueprint, something shifts, a single letter in its DNA, one molecule in the great spiral of its life, is different from before. That single change, so small it would vanish if you tried to imagine it, becomes the first step in a story that will outlive both the bacterium and the river's present form. The ordinary miracle of mutation in the human scale of things. Mutations sound rare, strange, unpredictable, but for bacteria, they are the fabric of existence. Every time a cell divides, it copies itself. It does this with astonishing precision, yet no copy is perfect. Sometimes an error slips in. A missing letter, an extra twist, a small swap between molecules. Most of these changes do nothing. Some weaken the cell, making it less able to survive. But every so often, perhaps once in millions of copies, a change appears that helps. And in a river touched by antibiotics, help can mean survival. Meeting the antibiotic, the river's currents carry more than silt and leaf fragments. In them drift the faint shadows of human medicine, traces of antibiotics from hospitals, homes, and farms. For most bacteria, these molecules are a death sentence. They slip into the cell's delicate machinery and jam its workings. They can stop it from building a wall around itself, or interfere with the way it makes proteins that are as essential to life as breath is to us. But the mutated bacterium, by accident of chemistry, is different. Perhaps the shape of one of its proteins has changed, so the antibiotic no longer fits. Perhaps it has gained a new way to pump the drug out before it can do harm. Perhaps it has learned to break the molecule apart before it reaches its target. The exact method does not matter to the bacterium. What matters is simple. It survives where others do not. The first survival, imagine the stone where it clings. Beside it, hundreds of its neighbors begin to fade. Their cell walls weaken, their inner workings collapse in hours. The surface of the stone is emptier than before. The mutated cell drifts in a space now free of competition. There is more food to absorb, more room to grow, more light filtering through the green-brown water. It is not aware of its advantage. Bacteria do not plan, do not calculate, but the effect is undeniable. Where others die, it lives. Multiplication. As power in the human world, one survivor among thousands is a fragile thing. But for bacteria, survival is the only requirement for abundance. The cell divides. Its offspring carry the same change, the same ability to endure the antibiotic's touch. They divide in turn. And soon the stone is again covered with life, but not the same life as before. Now, the film of bacteria is dominated by those who can ignore the antibiotic's presence. The medicine has not vanished, but to them it is harmless. The river as a laboratory. This process does not happen in isolation. Every second, billions of bacteria are dividing somewhere in the river. In every division, mutations are born. Some grant no benefit at all. Others, in the presence of antibiotics, become the difference between life and death. The river becomes a vast, unplanned laboratory, not designed by human hands, but shaped by human waste. Every trick that allows survival is kept. Every trick is shared, so resistance spreads, not just within one kind of bacterium, but across many. The language of genes. Bacteria have a skill we cannot match. They can trade abilities. Sideways, we pass traits only to our children. Bacteria can pass them to their neighbors. They do this through tiny packages of DNA plasmids that can slip from one cell to another. Oh, plasmid carrying resistance is like a book written in the universal language of survival. Bacterium that receives it can read it. Any bacterium that reads it can live in places where antibiotics once meant death. The mutated bacterium on the stone may never move far from its birthplace, but the knowledge it carries can travel the length of the river. The accumulation of defenses over time. Bacteria can collect not just one resistance, but many. One plasmid may hold the secret to resisting penicillin. Another may teach how to endure tetracycline. A third may guard against a newer, more complex drug. Cells that gather several of these become fortresses, impervious to medicine that once swept them away. These are the true superbugs, not because they are larger, not because they are faster, but because nothing we throw at them seems to work. The ripple effect. Spark of resistance in one bacterium is not contained by the stone where it began. The river's current carries bacteria downstream, depositing them in slow eddies, in muddy banks, in the mouths of estuaries. From there, tides can take them to the sea, or they can rise in vapor and rain, returning to the land and they return unseen. To the land, the journey of these microscopic travelers is not a straight line, it's a cycle, a spiral of movement that connects water, soil, sky, and living bodies. Rain falls on farmland. Water pools in the furrows between rows of crops. In those shallow puddles, bacteria stir and multiply again. If the soil is warm, their numbers grow quickly. If it is rich in nutrients from manure, compost, or fertilizer, it becomes not just a field for plants, but a field for resistance itself. And when the crops are harvested, washed, and shipped away, those microscopic passengers sometimes travel with them. The hidden roots into our lives. We think of rivers as separate from our homes, but they flow into our lives in ways we rarely notice. A splash of irrigation water on lettuce leaves, a rinse of vegetables at a market stall, clinging to a potato in a basket. In each of these, there is a chance, small but real, that a bacterium carrying resistance makes the leap into our kitchens. It may never cause illness. It may pass through unnoticed, but sometimes it finds a person already weakened by another sickness. And when a doctor reaches for the antibiotics that should help, they find the medicine has no effect. The invisible time bomb. One of the quiet dangers of antibiotic resistance is that it can wait. Bacteria do not need to act immediately. They can linger in the soil, in water, in the bodies of animals and humans, doing nothing harmful for months or years. But when they are given the right opportunity, when they find themselves in a place where they can grow without competition, their population can swell with astonishing speed. What began as a handful of cells in a river bend can become an infection in a hospital ward, miles away, months later. Why the river is the perfect teacher. Rivière is never still. Its waters mix constantly, cold meeting warm, fresh water meeting brackish tide. It carries particles of clay, tiny bits of rotting leaves, invisible chains of algae, Each of these can become a surface for bacteria to cling to, a place for them to meet, to swap plasmids, to learn. In a petri dish, scientists can watch bacteria evolve over days. In a river, the experiment never ends. It is fed by millions of interactions, millions of invisible exchanges. Every single hour, a single change that changes everything. It's easy to underestimate how little is needed for resistance to begin. 1 bacterium with one mutation is enough. If it can survive, if it can share its secret, if it can move. And bacteria have had billions of years to master the art of persistence. Long before humans existed, long before antibiotics were made in factories, microbes were already locked in chemical warfare with one another. Fungi in the soil produced antibiotic compounds to keep competitors away. Bacteria evolved defenses to resist them. The arms race was ancient. We only joined it recently when humans discovered antibiotics. We entered a battle already in progress, but we made one mistake. We flooded the battlefield with weapons without realizing that every weapon teaches the enemy how to fight back. The quiet acceleration. A river without antibiotics still contains resistant bacteria, but in small numbers, limited by the slow pace of natural mutation. River with constant antibiotic traces turns that slow pace into a sprint. It is as if the bacteria are taking thousands of exams every day, each one testing whether they can survive the presence of the drug. Those that fail vanish. Those that pass not only survive, but multiply their winning answer thousands of times over. And in this way, the river does not just carry life, it selects it. Passing the torch there is something eerie about the way resistance can leap from one kind of bacterium to another. You could think of it as a relay race, but instead of runners, it's an entire species passing a baton of survival. A harmless environmental bacterium living on a pebble might receive a plasmid from a resistant neighbor. It may never cause disease, but it can carry that plasmid into the gut of a fish or the soil of a garden. From there, it might meet a different bacterium, one that does infect humans. The baton changes hands again, and so resistance moves from the unseen world of the riverbed into the most personal places in our lives. The fragility of the old defenses for decades. Medicine has leaned on the reliability of antibiotics. We have treated them as constants, as tools that will always work so long as we choose the right one. But the river reminds us that nothing in biology is permanent. The drugs that once cured everything from skin infections to pneumonia are losing their edge. Some diseases, once thought to be relics of the past, are beginning to reappear in more stubborn forms. The bacteria have not grown more intelligent, only more prepared. And it was our own rivers. It does not happen in a moment. There is no flash of light, no audible click as a door is unlocked. The birth of a superbug is slow, so slow that if you stood by the river, you would see nothing change at all. The water would still ripple over stones. The reeds would still bend in the wind, and yet, beneath the surface, a shift begins. A chain of small chances. Every bacterium in the river is already a survivor. Even without antibiotics, life in moving. Water is harsh. Sunlight burns the surface. Currents batter the smallest creatures. Predators hunt without rest. For a bacterium to live long enough to divide is an act of persistence. And when antibiotics are added to this world, another obstacle appears. Most bacteria will not survive. Those that do may carry a single gene that offers protection. But one gene alone is not enough to make a superbug. A superbug is not born of one victory. It is the product of many. It is a creature that has collected shields against multiple threats, layer upon layer, until it stands untouchable against the medicines we once believed could stop it. The first shield in the beginning. A bacterium may gain resistance to just one antibiotic. Perhaps it learns to break the drug apart before it can damage its vital machinery. This knowledge comes in the form of DNA. A few hundred letters and a long genetic code. It might have evolved in soil bacteria that have defended themselves from naturally occurring antibiotics for millennia. It might have been passed down through countless generations, its usefulness hidden until the moment it is needed. The first shield is enough to survive a single battle, but the river carries many different weapons. The second and third, the bacterium that carries the first shield does not keep to itself. It drifts on currents, clings to stones, hitches, rides on tiny particles of organic matter. In the course of its travels, it meets others, bacteria from farms, from hospitals, from soil washed in during a storm. These strangers carry their own shields. One has learned to change the shape of the molecular target so the drug no longer fits. Another has built a pump that spits antibiotics back into the water before they can take hold, through plasmids. These bacteria can pass their defenses to one another. Was once a single shield becomes two, then three. With each addition, the bacterium's defenses grow broader. It can withstand multiple kinds of attack. It is no longer merely resistant. It is becoming resilient. The quiet training ground in the language of humans. A superbug sounds like something created in a laboratory, a deliberate act of design. But the river is its own kind of laboratory, one with infinite experiments running at once. Here, every encounter with antibiotics is a training session. Every surviving bacterium is a graduate of that session, carrying forward the lessons it has learned. The more often antibiotics enter the water, the more training sessions occur. And the more they occur, the greater the chances that a bacterium will gather not just one or two shields, but many. The moment of arrival, there is no celebration in the microbial world. No recognition that something extraordinary has happened. But somewhere in the swirling mix of water, silt, and life, a bacterium now exists that can withstand nearly everything we have to offer. This is the birth of a superb. It may not look different from its neighbors. It does not glow. It does not grow larger or move faster. Its strength is invisible, a resilience hidden in its code. And because it can survive, it will multiply from 1 to millions. Bacteria reproduce quickly, and double in number every 20 minutes. If a single superbug finds itself in a hospitable environment, a warm stretch of riverbank, nutrient-rich pool of stagnant water, it can expand its numbers exponentially. 1 becomes 2, it's become 4, 4 become 8 by the end of a day. What was once a single cell could have millions of descendants. Each carries the same set of shields. Each can resist the same array of drugs. Crossing into the human world in the river, a superbug may remain unnoticed. But rivers connect to everything. Water drawn for agriculture can bring these bacteria into the soil of farm fields. From there, it can reach the roots and leaves of crops. Water used for recreation can carry them into contact with swimmers, fishermen, children playing in the shallows. And if the river feeds into the sea, currents can transport them even farther, to beaches, estuaries, and harbors where humans gather. The first infection, when a superbug finally infects a human. The moment may seem unremarkable. It could begin as a skin wound, a urinary tract infection, a minor illness easily treated in the past. But when the usual antibiotics fail, and the second line fails, and the third, doctors begin to realize they are facing something different. By then, the superbug may already have spread to others' family members, hospital staffs, strangers in public places. The chain that began in the river has entered our bodies. The unseen cost. The birth of a superbug in a river does not just threaten individual health. It changes the landscape of medicine itself. Each resistant strain forces doctors to use stronger, more toxic, or less accessible drugs. Some of these drugs are expensive. Some have severe side effects. Some are so rare that they are reserved only for the most desperate cases. And in the space between one cure failing and another being found, lives are lost. Why the river matters. It would be easy to think of resistance as a hospital problem, something that happens in sterile rooms with bright lights. But much of the training that creates superbugs happens in places like this, in the gentle flow of a rural river, in the runoff from farmland, in the invisible mingling of bacteria from countless sources. The river is not the villain. It is simply the meeting place. The problem lies in what we allow to enter it, and how little we consider that the smallest organisms in the water are listening, learning, and remembering an ancient skill. A modern threat resistance is not new. Long before humans, bacteria fought each other with natural antibiotics, and those that survived developed ways to defend themselves. What is new is the concentration, variety, and constancy of the challenge we present, where nature's battles were brief and scattered. Our rivers now carry a steady stream of synthetic antibiotics, complex chemicals in doses that no bacterium would have encountered before in such an environment. The evolution of a superbug is not surprising. It is inevitable. The circle closes in, so the cycle completes itself. The river, which once carried the waste of antibiotics into the world of bacteria, now sends those bacteria back to us stronger, smarter, harder to kill. The birth of a superbug is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new one, a story in which our medicines must evolve as quickly as the creatures we seek to control. If you could see the river at the scale of its smallest inhabitants, you would find yourself in a world without quiet. It would not be the noise of wind or water, but the ceaseless exchange of life itself, messages, signals, and fragments of genetic code passing between organisms too small for the naked eye. Here, the bacteria are not solitary creatures, they are a community. And in this community, information is currency. A conversation without words. When you look at a pebble taken from the shallows, you might see only its smooth gray surface. But the bacteria, that surface is a city. They live in biofilms, slippery, slim layers that cling to stone, wood, or plant stems. Within these films, cells cluster so closely that the boundaries between them seem to dissolve through tiny pores in their walls. They can trade small fragments of DNA, like passing, folded notes in a crowded room. This is how resistance travels. One bacterium survives a brush with an antibiotic, perhaps because of a small genetic quirk that gives it the ability to pump the drug back out of its cells, or to break it apart before it can do harm. That knowledge, written in the language of genes, is not kept private. It can be given to a neighbor, to a stranger, even to a completely different species of bacterium. The river as a meeting place in the natural world. There are barriers that keep communities apart. Soil bacteria stay in the soil. Those in an animal's gut rarely meet the ones on a leaf, but the river is a mixer. It carries fragments of bacteria from upstream, from soil washed in by rain, from the feet of birds, from the mouths of fish, and from the pipes of towns. They meet here in the same flow of water, pressing against each other in the eddies and the shallows. And when they meet, they trade. The smallest acts of survival. Imagine a bacterium no larger than a speck of dust, living in the riverbed. It has never encountered an antibiotic before, not until the treated wastewater began to flow past its home. The first time, it feels the stress of the drug, a weakening, a slowing of its ability to grow. But nearby, another bacterium has seen this before, carries a gene that neutralizes the threat. And because bacteria reproduce quickly, doubling their numbers in minutes or hours, there is little distinction between survival and generosity. A helpful gene can be copied and passed on just as easily as a drop of water passes downstream. The plasmid couriers. Much of this genetic exchange happens through plasmids, small, circular pieces of DNA that are separate from the main bacterial chromosome. Plasmids are remarkable couriers. A single plasmid can carry multiple resistance genes, each one a shield against a different antibiotic. When bacteria touch, a thin bridge of protein can form between them, a connection called a pilus. Through this bridge, a plasmid can slide from one cell to another, crossing species boundaries as though they do not exist. In the space of an afternoon, a resistance gene that evolved in a bacterium from a human gut can find itself inside a bacterium that lives only in river mud, and once there, it can remain for generations, waiting for the day it is needed. The silent archive. This is what makes the gathering of genes in rivers so powerful and so difficult to reverse. Even if the antibiotic molecules disappeared overnight, the genes they inspired would remain filed away in the DNA of countless bacterial lineages. The river becomes an archive, a library of survival strategies collected over decades. Some of those strategies will never be called upon. Others may be awakened the next time a similar drug flows through the water. Marketplace without boundaries. If we think of genes as knowledge, then the river is an open-air market where there are no locked stalls, no guarded gates. Bacteria here do not care about human laws, about whether a drug is patented or restricted. They share freely. Every new arrival adds to the diversity of possible solutions. Every stress, every chemical, every change in temperature, every flood or drought is a new reason to adapt, and each adaptation, once discovered, can travel anywhere the water carries its host. When hospitals meet rivers, some of the most troubling resistance genes trace their origins not to farms or soil, but to the bacteria that inhabit hospitals, in places where patients are treated with powerful antibiotics. The bacteria that survive become specialists in defense. When wastewater from hospitals flows into the municipal system, those bacteria already resistant to multiple drugs may find their way into rivers. Here, they meet the wild bacteria of the environment. They trade their survival skills in exchange for others' heat tolerance from a microbe that lives in thermal springs, the ability to survive freezing from one that inhabits Arctic streams. The result is something more versatile, more resilient, and harder to fight. The shape of the futurette is easy to imagine that resistance is a battle between humans and bacteria, with clear sides and clear victories. But the reality is different. The river's bacteria do not resist out of malice. They adapt because adaptation is their nature. They have done it for billions of years, long before humans learned to name them, long before we discovered antibiotics. In a way, the river's gathering of genes is simply a continuation of what life has always done, trading, blending, and evolving. The difference now is that the challenges we introduce into the water are more complex, more potent, and more constant than anything nature has offered before. What cannot be taken back once a resistance gene spreads widely enough, it is almost impossible to erase. Even if humans stopped all unnecessary antibiotic use tomorrow, even if wastewater treatment plants began removing every trace of the drugs, the genes would remain in the bacterial archive, waiting for their heir moment. This is why scientists often speak of slowing resistance rather than stopping it. The goal is not to turn back the clock that is beyond reach, but to stretch time, to keep antibiotics useful for as long as possible. The river's memories stand, get the water's edge, and look at the way the current bends around a fallen branch. How leaves circle in the backwater before rejoining the main flow. Somewhere in that swirl, bacteria are trading genes, a silent commerce that may shape the course of future medicine. It is strange to think that a decision made in a doctor's office today could ripple outward into this river, into the DNA of creatures that will never see a human face, and from there into the bloodstream of someone decades from now. The river remembers, even when we do not. The journey of a river is always a journey outward. Even the smallest trickle has a destination. It may meander through fields, curve through towns, glide under bridges where shadows ripple, but always it moves forward towards something larger. 4. The bacteria riding its currents. There is no sense of travel, no awareness of maps or coasts, yet they are travelers all the same, and their road is paved in water. The long carriage, when a river leaves the uplands and begins to widen. Its pace slows, but its reach expands. A superbug, born in a narrow rural stream, may drift for days or weeks, passing from cold mountain runoff into warmer, richer waters where algae bloom in the sun. Here, bacterial passengers encounter whole new communities, marine microorganisms in estuaries, plankton drifting like motes in light, tiny crustaceans clinging to strands of vegetation. Each meeting is an opportunity for exchange. DNA passes between strangers, sometimes carrying resistance genes with it. The river is no longer just a route, it is a meeting ground, a living marketplace of traits crossing the estuary. At the edge of land and sea lies the estuary, a place where fresh water meets salt. This is not a gentle meeting. It is a wrestling match of densities, currents folding over one another. Salt pushing against fresh, fresh pressing into salt. Bacteria, accustomed to river life, face a challenge here. The salt water threatens to pull water from their cells, to dehydrate and kill them, but some endure. A few adapt, changing the machinery of their membranes, finding ways to survive the salinity. Those that do pass through the estuaries, shifting tides, enter the vastness beyond the open sea. The first taste of the ocean for a bacterium. The sea is both peril and opportunity. Its waters are cooler, its nutrient sources more scattered. Predators abound, protozoa and other microscopic hunters patrol the depths. Yet here too, there are chances for survival. Organic debris from river mouths creates small oases, and coastal pollution, runoff from ports, wastewater from seaside towns can seed familiar environments even in the saltwater world. The superbug that survives the crossing now finds itself in a new arena where it may meet marine bacteria with their own ancient resistances to natural compounds. In these encounters, new genetic exchanges are possible. A shield forged in a river may be joined by one shaped in the deep ocean. Traveling by current once in the ocean, movement changes. The steady push of a river's flow is gone. Here, vast currents rule slow, powerful rivers within the sea itself, driven by winds, tides, and the pull of the moon. A bacterium can drift for hundreds of miles this way. One week it is off the coast of Kent, the next near the mouth of the Seine. Then onward toward the Bay of Biscay. It might settle temporarily on the hull of a ship, only to be washed free in another port. Or it could be carried by a floating fragment of seaweed to waters it could never have reached on its own. Ports and harbors, the ocean is not empty. Where rivers meet the sea, cities often rise. Ports are busy places, waterways humming with trade, travel, and waste. In harbors, water is often shallow and slow-moving, creating pools where bacteria can linger. Ships pump out ballast water taken from other parts of the world, introducing entirely new microbial communities. Here, a superbug can meet distant cousins from other continents, each carrying their own defensive skills. These exchanges are quiet but profound small edits to DNA that may change the bacterium's future. The leap to distant shores, cargo ships carry more than goods. Their ballast water alone is a vehicle for life on a microscopic scale. A bacterium caught in this transfer might leave the English Channel and find itself in the harbors of the Mediterranean, the Baltic, even the Americas. In this way, a superbug born in a small English river can, within months, become a global traveler. Life on the coastline, coastal communities depend on the sea. They fish, they harvest shellfish, they swim and surf and sail. Any bacterium present in these waters has multiple chances to cross into human life. Shellfish, in particular, are effective collectors of microbes. Okay? As they filter water for food, they concentrate bacteria in their tissues. A resistant strain in the water can become a resistant strain in the food chain. And once in the food chain, distance between the ocean and bloodstream is short. The ocean, as a reservoir of the sea, does not simply disperse superbugs. It can also hold them in sediment along the seafloor, in biofilms, coating rocks, and piers, in the guts of marine creatures. Resistant bacteria can persist for long periods, waiting for the right conditions to multiply again. Storms can stir these reservoirs, returning bacteria to the water column where they can travel anew. The global spread, because oceans connect all lands. What begins as a local environmental issue becomes a global one. A resistant bacterium that arose from antibiotic waste in one river can, through the combined forces of natural currents and human transport, find its way into ecosystems thousands of miles away in these new places. It may encounter different drugs, different pressures, different communities of microbes, all of which can further refine its abilities. The result is not just the spread of one superbug, but the creation of new variations, each adapted to the unique conditions it has found. Invisible, yet everywhere from a human perspective, it is easy to imagine the sea as a vast, self-cleaning body. We picture dilution, that what is released into the ocean is quickly rendered harmless by its size. But microbes do not obey our sense of scale. A drop of water can hold millions. A tiny patch of surface film can shelter whole microbial cities, too. A bacterium, the ocean, is not an endless empty space. It is a landscape rich with habitats, a place where survival is possible in 1,000 small niches. The return to land eventually. Many of these bacteria find their way back to shore. They may return in the spray of waves and fish and shellfish brought to market, in the cooling water used by coastal power plants, or in the ballast tanks of returning ships. When they do, they carry with them all that they have learned in their TRAVELSA library of resistance, assembled from river, estuary, and sea. On land, they may enter hospitals, homes, and communities that have never before encountered their specific combination of defenses. A circle without end from stream to sea and back again. The journey of a resistant bacterium is not a straight line, but a loop, one that grows wider with every cycle, and with each turn, the potential for resistance deepens. New combinations arise, old defenses are strengthened, and the invisible travelers grow harder to defeat. The birth of a superbug in a river is the first step. Its spread into the sea is the second. What comes after is the slow weaving of these organisms into the very fabric of our shared world. Long before the sea was ever considered a carrier of disease, rivers were seen as the lifeblood of land. They nourished crops, watered livestock, and shaped entire civilizations. For farmers, water is not just a resource, it is a promise. It is the quiet understanding that seed and soil, given enough of it, will yield food. But water is never only water. It carries the memory of everything it has touched: mountains, cities, pipes, ports, and now the microscopic legacies of our medicines. The drawing of the water on the edges of farmland. Pumps hum like the slow breathing of the earth. They draw water from rivers, canals, and reservoirs, sending it into irrigation systems that stretch across fields like veins. Some farms rely on direct river water, the same river that may have carried wastewater from upstream towns or runoff from urban streets. Others use stored water in holding ponds. But even here, the journey of that water began in streams that have been touched by the traces of human life. Into the soil, when irrigation water meets soil, it does more than wet the ground. It seeps through, carrying whatever it holds: nutrients, silt, minerals, and unseen bacteria. The resistant strains brought from rivers can find new homes here. Some remain in the top layers of earth, nestled among root systems and decaying organic matter. Others travel deeper, sinking into the cool, dark spaces where oxygen thins and the microbial world is dense and ancient. The meeting of microbial oral soil is already alive with bacteria, tens of millions in a single handful. Most are harmless, many are beneficial, breaking down plant matter, fixing nitrogen, and creating the quiet chemistry that feeds crops. When resistant bacteria arrive in this rich community, it is like a new player entering a long-running conversation. They bring genetic tools shaped by encounters with antibiotics in rivers and seas. Here, those tools can be traded, swapped, stitched into the DNA of entirely different species, even if the newcomers do not survive long. Their genes can remain passed into the local soil bacteria who now carry resistance without ever having seen the original threat. On the roots of crops, plants do not live apart from microbes. They live with them. Their roots, surrounded by colonies that feed, protect, decay, and interact. The bacteria from irrigation water can join this root community. Some adhere to the fine root hairs, where they can feed on sugars the plant releases into the soil. Others slip inside the root tissues themselves, becoming endophytes, invisible passengers within the plant. From here, they may travel upward, into stems, leaves, and in some cases, fruits or grains, onto the hands of workers in the heat of the day. Field workers move between rows, harvesting vegetables, pruning branches, checking irrigation lines. Hands touch plants, plants touch soil, and the invisible passengers in the soil can be carried on skin, tools, and gloves. Most would never cause harm, but when resistant bacteria are among them, each contact is a chance for transfer. The bacteria do not need intent, only opportunity. The path to livestock water from rivers also fills the troughs of farm animals. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and poultry drink deeply, sometimes from clean containers, sometimes from ponds and ditches where runoff collects. In these bodies, resistant bacteria can survive in the gut, mixing with the animal's own microbial resonance. They may be excreted back into the environment through manure, a rich medium where bacteria can thrive. That manure is often spread on fields as fertilizer, completing a loop that ties together water, soil, crops, and animals. The produce we eat from fields. The journey turns toward us. Leafy greens, berries, herbs, and root vegetables are all touched by irrigation water during growth. If resistant bacteria have settled on leaves, they can be stubborn to remove. Some cling tightly in the folds of lettuce or hide beneath the fine hairs of spinach leaves. Others may live inside plant tissues, protected from washing altogether. The result is a quiet, visible thread that connects river water to the dinner table. The role of weather rainfall can dilute contamination or spread it further. A sudden storm after irrigation can wash resistant bacteria from soil into drainage ditches, sending them back toward rivers. Flooding can push river water far into farmland, depositing whatever it holds into fields and leaving residues that remain long after the water recedes. In dry spells, the opposite happens. Less fresh water flows, and concentrations of contaminants in rivers rise, making each irrigation cycle a stronger dose of whatever the upstream world has released. Markets and distribution, harvested crops, travel. They move by truck, train, and ship, crossing counties, borders, and oceans. A bag of salad greens harvested in one valley may be eaten thousands of miles away, and if resistant bacteria are present, their reach extends with the produce in this way. What began as a trace in one UK river can appear in kitchens and restaurants across the world. The farmer's dilemma for farmers. The idea of superbugs in their fields is both alarming and difficult to control. Water is often taken from the only available source. Testing for resistant bacteria in irrigation water is not yet standard practice, and even if it were, the cost and logistics could be daunting for smaller farms. Many farmers are already facing the pressures of climate change, market demand, and the need to produce more with less. Adding microbial resistance to their list of concerns feels like another weight in a basket that is already full. Research in the furrow sum. Scientists are studying ways to reduce the spread of resistant bacteria through agriculture. They experiment with new water treatment methods that could be used on site before irrigation. They study crop varieties to see if some are less likely to host harmful bacteria. They explore the use of beneficial microbes that could outcompete resistant strains in soil. But these solutions are still developing, and the problem continues to evolve faster than the measures meant to contain it. The quiet spread. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that this spread is silent. There is no smell, no taste, no visible sign that a leaf or berry carries resistant bacteria. The only way to know is to look, to take samples, to test, to map the invisible. And even when we find them, removing them from the cycle is difficult. Once resistance genes are in the soil, they can remain for years, long after the bacteria that carried them are gone. The interwoven loop from rivers to fields, from fields to food, from food back to humans. The loop is not just closed, it is layered. Animals, wild and domestic, drink from the same waters. Birds move between coast and countryside. Insects cross between farms and wetlands. Each movement is another chance for resistant bacteria to change hands, to find new hosts, to learn new tricks. A future written in water and soil. If we do nothing, the pattern will continue. Every season will add more resistant strains to the land. Every harvest will carry a little more of this invisible burden. The solution will not be simple. It will require changes in how we use antibiotics, how we treat waste, how we manage water, and how we farm. But the first step is to understand that the quiet fields, the green rows waving in the sun, are not untouched by the decisions we make far upstream. In the still surface of a river, you can see your own reflection, but in the invisible currents beneath, another reflection forms, not of your face, but of your habits, your systems, your blind spots. Each resistant bacterium in that water is not simply a microbe, it is a record, a living archive of the medicines we have made, the ways we have used them, and the unintended pathways they have taken. The first reflections, when antibiotics were discovered, they were a miracle. Infections that once meant certain death could be turned aside with a pill or an injection. It felt like an era of illness was ending, and humanity had won a decisive battle. For decades, antibiotics were used freely. They were prescribed for ailments that might have healed without them. They were added to livestock feed, not to treat sickness, but to make animals grow faster. The thinking was simple. If a little was good, more must be better. Few considered that the bacteria themselves were listening and learning. Microbes, as students' bacteria, do not think, but they adapt. Each exposure to an antibiotic is a lesson in survival. Those that cannot endure, die. Those that endure, pass on the method. This learning does not fade with generations. It is written into their genes. One microbe's hard-won survival becomes a permanent skill in the library of its species. In this way, our rivers have become classrooms, and we are the unwitting teachers. The prescription loop: the more antibiotics we use, the more resistant bacteria emerge. The more resistant bacteria we encounter, the stronger drugs we create. The stronger drugs we create, the more resistance adapts to meet them. It is a loop, self-reinforcing, spiraling, a slow race in which we are never as far ahead as we think. In hospital wards, this is already visible. Doctors speak of last resort antibiotics, the ones they keep for the most stubborn infections. But the rivers remind us that last resort is not a fixed point. It is simply a stage in an ongoing conversation between human ingenuity and microbial persistence. The rural reflection in the countryside. the problem takes a quieter form. Doctor in a small village might prescribe antibiotics to a patient with a mild illness just to be safe. Leftover pills are sometimes flushed, or tossed in the bin where rain can leach them into soil. Livestock treated for infection shed antibiotics in their waste, and the runoff carries them into ditches and streams. These actions feel small, almost invisible. But in the sum of thousands, they shape the microbial memory that now drifts in every current. Urban mirrors in cities. The pathways multiply. Hospitals discharge treated wastewater that still contains traces of the drugs used inside. Factories manufacturing antibiotics release residues into nearby waterways. Sewers overflow during storms, mixing human waste with untreated water and sending it into rivers. In these dense and busy environments, bacteria encounter not just one antibiotic, but many. They are exposed to a mosaic of chemical challenges, a pressure that accelerates their evolution. How the river reads, boosts scientists. Testing a river for resistant bacteria is like reading a diary. The presence of certain genes tells the story of the antibiotics used upstream. They can see which drugs are still common, which are fading, and which have already been met with bacterial countermeasures. Some rivers in the UK now contain bacteria resistant to almost every class of antibiotic we have. It is as though the water has quietly learned the entire syllabus of modern medicine. Beyond Human Health Week often speak of antibiotic resistance as a problem for hospitals, a medical crisis. But the rivers remind us that it is also an environmental crisis. Fish, birds, and other wildlife come into contact with resistant bacteria. These microbes can move into ecosystems far from human settlements. In the gut of a gull, a strain of resistant E. coli can travel hundreds of miles along the coast. In the intestines of a migratory fish, it can move between rivers, even between countries. The mirror the river holds up is not just for humanity, it is for the entire web of life. We're part an old pattern in a new form, if you look far enough back. This is not the first time we have seen reflections like this. The Industrial Revolution left soot and chemicals in rivers, and we saw the reflection in dying fish. Agricultural intensification left nitrates and pesticides in streams, and we saw the reflection in algal blooms. Now, we see ourselves in the form of microbes, reshaped by our own medicines. Each era leaves its mark, its own unintentional fingerprint in the water. The illusion of boundaries. 1. Reason this reflection is so stark is that we believe in boundaries that bacteria do not recognize. We separate medical wastes from agricultural runoff, human health from environmental health, urban water from rural water. But in reality, all water is one water, A river does not stop carrying bacteria because it passes a county line. Current does not choose to leave its microbes behind when it meets the sea. The illusion of separation is one of the reasons we have been slow to act. What the mirror shows next if we continue as we are. The reflection will sharpen. More bacteria in more rivers will carry resistance to more drugs. The infections we consider minor today, urinary tract infections, skin wounds, ear infections, could again become dangerous. The rivers are telling us that the age of antibiotics is not endless. And in their quiet way, they are showing us the edges of that age. The human role in the picture of the mirror is not meant only to frighten, it is meant to inform. We have choices. We can reduce unnecessary prescriptions. We can invest in better wastewater treatment. We can regulate how antibiotics are used in farming. We can design drugs that break down quickly once they leave the body. Each of these actions would alter the reflection in the water. The danger of looking away, the hardest thing, is that the problem is invisible. You cannot see resistance in a glass of water. You cannot feel it in a handful of soil. You cannot hear it in the rush of a stream. And so, it is easy to believe that the danger is far away, or exaggerated, or someone else's responsibility. But the river does not lie. Its contents are the sum of everything we release. And in that sum, we can see both the problem and the path forward. A mirror that remembers him like a true mirror. This one remembers what it reflects. Bacteria in a river today are shaped by antibiotics, used 10, 20, even 50 years ago. The reflection we see now is not just of who we are, it is of who we have been. To change the image must change not only the present, but the habits we have carried for generations. The closing image: imagine standing by a river at dusk. The surface is still enough to hold the shape of the sky. You lean over and see your face framed by drifting clouds. But beneath that image, the currents are carrying something else. The echoes of prescriptions, the fingerprints of prints of farming, the invisible history of a century of medicine. It is not a reason to turn away. It is a reason to look more closely, to understand that the reflection is ours to change if we are willing. We are willing. There is a kind of science that works in silence. It does not announce itself with explosions or shout its results in dramatic graphs. It is a science that listens to water, to currents, to the smallest of lives. The researchers who practice it stand ankle deep in rivers or crouch beside lab benches with vials no bigger than a thimble. Their work is to catch what the human eye cannot see, because in these waters, where the ripples seem harmless, there are signals, fragments of DNA, traces of molecules, whispers of resistance that could tell the story of what is coming next. The first step, sampling the silent savory journey into the invisible, begins with something that feels simple. Collecting water, researchers lower bottles into the river, facing upstream so that their own movement does not disturb what they seek. They take samples from the middle of the current, from the shallows where light reaches the stones, from the shadowed banks where organic debris collects. It looks almost too gentle to matter. But in each bottle, millions of microscopic lives are caught in suspension. Some have swum there on their own. Others have been carried by rainwater running from farms, from streets, from wastewater pipes. The river, in this moment, is not just water. It is a library. Every drop contains records written in the code of DNA. The work of filters and needles back in the laboratory. So the work shifts from the visible to the nearly invisible. First, the water is passed through fine filters, membranes so thin that only bacteria, viruses, particles smaller than a hair's width are caught. The filters themselves look like nothing special, small, flat, almost like paper discs. But pressed within there, we've our entire communities of microbes. Technicians wear gloves, not because the water looks dangerous, but because they know it can carry strains of bacteria that have already learned to defeat our strongest medicines. From these filters, the scientists extract DNA, a process both delicate and precise. The genetic material is then read by sequencing machines, which turn the twisted ladders of code into lines of data that can be studied, compared, and stored for years. Mapping the unseen, the patterns in that data are not random. By examining which resistance genes are present, researchers can tell which antibiotics are being overused in the area, which bacteria are adapting fastest, and even where the contamination might be coming from. One river might show a strong signal for genes that resist tetracyclines, often used in livestock. Another might show resistance to carbapenems, a class reserved for serious hospital infections, when mapped across a region. These findings create a kind of heat map, not of temperature, but of adaptation. It is a picture of evolution happening. In real time, the clues in flow and season. Not every day in a river is the same. Rain can dilute or concentrate what flows through it. Warm summer water can speed bacterial growth, while winter slows it down. Scientists often return to the same spots in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, watching how the patterns shift. After heavy rains, levels of resistant bacteria, sometimes SPIKE, sign that runoff is carrying more from farms and towns. In dry months, Slower water can mean that resistant strains linger longer, biding their time in sunlit pools. It is like tracking an invisible migration, one that does not follow borders or coastlines, responds only to chemistry, to climate, to the steady flow of water downhill. The human fingerprint in the data in the strings of letters that make up bacterial DNA. There is no sentence that says, "This came from a hospital." There is no paragraph that admits these genes were taught by a prescription. And yet, patterns emerge. A resistant strain found in a rural stream might carry a gene first identified in a city hospital decades ago. Its presence upstream from farmland could mean that human waste, treated but not purified enough, still finding its way into irrigation channels. Another strain found near a livestock operation might carry multiple resistance genes, a genetic toolkit built by years of low-dose antibiotic exposure in feed and water. In both cases, the river is not creating resistance. It is collecting it. It is a mirror, but also a messenger. Why this work is slow and like some fields of science. This one does not yield instant answers. It is not enough to find a resistant gene once researchers must see it appear again and again, in different seasons, in different years. No, it is truly rooted in the ecosystem. Samples must be carefully preserved, sometimes frozen for future study when new sequencing methods emerge. The story of resistance is not told in a single sampling trip. It is built over decades of records. It's like watching a coastline change through hundreds of photographs. This slowness can be frustrating to those who want quick solutions. But in the quiet persistence of these scientists is the same patience that bacteria themselves possess. Both know that change, once set in motion, moves steadily forward. The challenge of global currents, one of the most humbling lessons from tracing the invisible, is that rivers are only one chapter in a much larger story. A resistant bacterium can travel downstream to the sea, where tides and currents may carry it far along a coast. It can cling to the hull of a ship, or hide in the ballast water discharged in another port. Migratory birds can drink from one river and deposit its microbes thousands of kilometers away. Fish can move resistance genes between freshwater and saltwater ecosystems in this way. The work of mapping one small river in the UK is connected to the work of scientists sampling in South Asia, in Africa, in the Americas. The genes do not care about the lines on our maps. When the map becomes a warning, there are moments when the science moves from observation to alarm. If a resistance gene, long known only in a specific hospital outbreak, is suddenly found in a wild river, it means the barrier between clinical environments and the natural world has broken. If multiple rivers in different regions begin to show the same rare gene, it means the spread is no longer local, it is global. These are the moments when the data is handed to policymakers, to environmental agencies, to public health networks, And still, the question remains, will they act quickly enough? The fragility of funding and focus, ironically, this slow, careful work is often the first to lose funding. When headlines move on, when budgets tighten, projects are cut. The researchers who remain do so out of commitment, often piecing together small grants to keep sampling trips alive. They know that bacteria do not wait for election cycles. They evolve whether or not the world is paying attention. The scientist's quiet reward for those who stay. There is a quiet reward. Sometimes, years of sampling reveal that resistance levels in a river have fallen, perhaps after changes in farming practices or the upgrade of a wastewater plant. In those moments, the invisible becomes visible again, not in the water itself, but in the knowledge that a silent danger has been lessened. It is not a reward you can hold in your hand. It is a reward you carry in the mind, the awareness that your patience helped bend a trend toward safety. Looking ahead, new tools for old water stuff. Next generation of tracing is already emerging. Portable sequencing devices can now read bacterial DNA in the field, cutting analysis time from weeks to hours. Machine learning models can predict the spread of certain genes based on climate data and land use maps. Even satellites, though they cannot see bacteria, can track the conditions that make certain rivers more vulnerable. But even with these advances, the work still comes back to a person kneeling by a river, collecting a sample, knowing that in this bottle is a chapter of a much larger book. The chapter ends, but the river doesn't want the scientists pack up for the day. The river keeps flowing. New rains will bring new loads of silt and runoff. New bacteria will arrive, some carrying old resistances, some learning new ones, and somewhere downstream, another team may be sampling too, part of a network of watchers trying to see the shape of something that has no shape but can be felt. In every current dot, the science of tracing the invisible is not glamorous, but it is necessary, because in a quiet race between our medicines and the microbes, the first step in protecting the future is to know exactly what lives in the water. Today, the cost of resistance is not written on a receipt, okay? It does not come as a bill slipped quietly under the door. It is written in hospital charts, in the weight of conversations between doctors and families, in the moments when a medicine that once worked no longer does. It is felt in the long nights when a patient's fever does not break. It is seen in the careful eyes of a nurse who knows that the drugs in her hands may not be enough. The first price? Time. When antibiotics fail, time becomes the first currency we lose. In a world where treatment is simple, an infection might mean 3 days of tablets, a week of rest, and life returns to normal. But when resistance takes hold, recovery is measured in weeks, sometimes months. Patients remain in hospital beds longer, isolated to prevent the spread. Work is missed, school is missed, and the small routines of daily life are put on hold indefinitely. Time slips away, not in dramatic bursts, but in a steady drip. Like the 4 lines delivering the strongest drugs available, the hidden costs families carry. The cost of resistance does not stop at the hospital door. Families travel long distances to visit sick relatives. They spend money on fuel, on train tickets, on meals grabbed quickly between visits. Some take unpaid leave from work, reducing income at the very moment expenses rise. Others stay in hotels near the hospital, spending savings meant for the future. Children are cared for by relatives, or sometimes left to manage alone. Birthdays pass without celebration. Holidays are canceled. The infection may be in one person's body, but its shadow falls across an entire household. The strain on hospitals for hospitals. Resistant infections are like small fires that never go out. Rooms must be cleaned with special protocols. Staff must wear protective gowns and gloves, changing them between patients. Beds remain occupied far longer than planned, reducing capacity for new admissions. Surgeries are delayed, sometimes canceled, because the risk of introducing a resistant infection is too high. Entire wards may be forced to close to contain an outbreak, a decision that echoes through every department, reshuffling schedules and lengthening waiting lists for patients who have nothing to do with the resistant strain. The economic toll on a nation when you add these pieces together: longer hospital stays, special cleaning procedures, postponed operations, lost workdays. The economic weight grows heavy in the UK. Studies estimate that antimicrobial resistance already costs the economy hundreds of millions of pounds each year. Globally, the World Bank warns that by 2050, resistance could push millions of people into poverty through lost productivity and higher medical costs. It is a slow-moving crisis, not a sudden collapse, but a steady erosion of the systems we take for granted. The loss of medical certainty for much of the last century. We've lived in a rare moment in history, a time when most bacterial infections could be cured. A deep cut, a surgical wound, a chest infection, all could be met with confidence and a prescription. But as resistance spreads, that certainty begins to fade. Doctors weigh options and must sometimes admit there are none left. Procedures once considered routine become dangerous. Even childbirth, once transformed by antibiotics, could regain the risks it carried 100 years ago. The patients who run out of options there are stories to many of patients whose infections no longer respond to any available antibiotic. Some are people with underlying illnesses, their immune systems already fragile. Others are healthy, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, a contaminated wound, seat, an unlucky exposure in hospital. When the last drug fails, medicine shifts from curing to managing symptoms. Doctors can only keep the patient as comfortable as possible while the infection takes its course. It is in these moments that the true cost of resistance is most painfully clear, not numbers in a report, but lives shortened, futures erased. The spread beyond hospitals' resistance is not confined to the walls of healthcare. It moves quietly into communities. Infections caught at home, on farms, in workplaces. A child may scrape their knee at a playground and develop an infection that resists first-line treatment. A farmer may inhale dust carrying resistant bacteria from livestock. A traveler may bring home an infection acquired abroad, unaware until it becomes severe. In these cases, resistance is not an abstract threat. It is a neighbor, a coworker, a family member facing an infection that no longer bends to treatment. The psychological cost there is also a quieter cost, the one paid in worry. For patients who survive a resistant infection, the fear of it returning can shape their lives. They may avoid hospitals, decline surgeries, or change travel plans to avoid regions with high resistance rates. For healthcare workers, there is the constant pressure of working with limited tools. Each decision carries the weight of knowing that the wrong choice could allow resistance to spread further. This mental toll is harder to measure, but it accumulates like silt in a river, slowing the current over time. The cost to future generations, perhaps the most sobering cost, is the one that has not yet been paid. Children born today could grow up in a world where common infections are once again dangerous, where medical advances are held back by the inability to control bacteria. Cancer treatments that rely on antibiotics to protect weakened immune systems could become riskier. Organ transplants could carry higher mortality rates. The achievements of modern medicine could be rolled back by decades. This is the debt we risk passing on. It's not just a problem for our time, but a burden for those who have not yet had a voice. In it, the interconnectedness of the cost of resistance, is not neatly divided into categories. It is not only medical, or only economic, or only personal. Each piece affects the others. A farmer's financial loss from a resistant infection in livestock can affect food prices. A delayed surgery due to hospital capacity issues can impact an entire family's well-being. The fear carried by one patient can change how a community approaches healthcare. It is a web, and the threads run through every part of society. Why prevention is cheaper than cure. The paradox is simple. The cost of preventing resistance is far lower than the cost of living with it. Reducing unnecessary antibiotic use, investing in wastewater treatment, supporting resistance monitoring, all require resources, far fewer than the vast sums spent treating untreatable infections and managing their consequences. It is a choice between paying steadily now or paying heavily later, when cost becomes motivation in some regions. It is the economic argument that finally spurs action. Hospitals under strain push for stricter infection control when they see the drain on their budgets. Governments support clean water projects when they recognize the link to public health spending. Even so, the challenge remains. Resistance grows quietly. The costs arrive slowly, too slowly to provoke the kind of urgency reserved for sudden disasters. Holding the line where we can't, the cost of resistance is real, but it is not inevitable. Every step taken to reduce antibiotic misuse, to clean the pathways through which resistance spreads, and to monitor its presence is a step toward keeping our medicines effective for as long as possible. The bill for inaction is one we cannot afford. Cleaning a river is not like scrubbing a floor. You cannot empty it, wipe it dry, and start again. A river is always moving. What is upstream becomes downstream in minutes. The water you touch is already on its way to the sea. To clean a river, you must think like it, moving slowly, patiently, okay? Understanding that every drop is connected to the one before and the one after. The first step, knowing what's there. You cannot remove what you do not measure. So, the first step in cleaning is not to add filters or chemicals. It is to listen to the river. Scientists wade in, sometimes to their knees, sometimes in small boats, lowering bottles into the current. The bottles do not fill with anything dramatic, just clear water. But in laboratories, machines whisper the truth. Antibiotics in micrograms, resistance genes in fragments of DNA, bacteria carrying the instructions for survival. This invisible map becomes the foundation. It tells us where the river's wounds are deepest and where the water still flows mostly clean. Wastewater treatment. The first barrier. Most rivers are not polluted directly by hand. They receive what is left over from our homes, our hospitals, our farms, all channeled through pipes to wastewater treatment plants in the UK. Many of these plants were built decades ago. They do a good job removing large debris, settling out solids, breaking down organic waste. But antibiotics, resistant bacteria, they are small enough to slip through the nets we've made. Newer plants are experimenting, using advanced filtration, with membranes fine enough to stop bacteria, ultraviolet light to break DNA apart, ozone to strip antibiotics from the water's chemistry. Each upgrade costs money, and each takes time to install. But every plant improved is a gate closed to resistance moving downstream. The challenge of hospitals are both healers and without meaning to. Sources of antibiotic waste. A patient's body does not use every milligram of medicine it receives. What remains is excreted, flushed, and sent into the same sewer systems as ordinary waste. Some countries now treat hospital wastewater separately, using small, high-intensity cleaning systems before it ever reaches the wider network. These systems can target the unique chemical load of medical waste, breaking down drugs, killing bacteria before they enter the public system. It is delicate work, so harsh, and you harm the environment downstream. It's gentle and resistance slips through untouched. Nature as an Ali knot. All solutions are made of steel and electricity. Wetlands, those quiet, cored, green sponges of the land, can clean water in ways that machines sometimes cannot. When wastewater is channeled through reed beds, the plant's roots host communities of microbes that break down pollutants. Sediment traps small particles, slowing the flow so heavier matter settles out. Sunlight warms the shallow water, reducing bacterial survival. In some pilot projects, artificial wetlands have reduced antibiotic concentrations by more than half, while also creating habitats for birds and insects. Nature's methods are slow and space-hungry, but they work quietly, without power, cables, or maintenance crews. The fight at the farm. Microculture is another pathway for resistance. When livestock are given antibiotics, whether for illness or, in some places, to promote growth, some of those drugs pass unchanged into manure. When that manure is stored or spread on fields, rain carries traces into streams and rivers. Farm-based solutions are often simple in concept, but demanding in practice. Storage systems that keep manure dry and away from waterways, buffer strips of grass and trees to filter runoff, limiting antibiotic use to cases where it is truly necessary. Some farms are even exploring composting manure at high temperatures, which can kill resistant bacteria before the waste ever touches soil, removing the genes themselves. Even if every antibiotic molecule was stripped from the water, it's good. The genes that grant resistance can remain floating inside bacteria or even alone in the environment, ready to be taken up by other microbes. This is where the science becomes almost surgical. Certain treatments, like ultraviolet light and advanced oxidation, can break DNA apart, rendering it useless. But the challenge is applying these treatments at the scale of an entire river system without harming the life we want to protect. It is a balance between cleaning enough and not cleaning so harshly that the cure becomes its own form of damage. Public awareness as a cleaning tool. Not all pollution is the work of large institutions. Every time a person throws unused antibiotics into the bin or flushes them down the toilet, they contribute to the load. In some towns, pharmacies have begun offering safe disposal points for leftover medicine, small collection bins that ensure drugs are destroyed instead of washed downstream. Public campaigns, quietly persistent, remind people that water is not a bottomless sink. The things we pour away do not vanish, they simply move. Cleaning as an ongoing act, not a single event. One of the most difficult truths about cleaning rivers is that it is never finished. Even the most advanced plant cannot remove everything. Even the most careful farm cannot stop every drop of runoff. The system is too vast, flow too constant. Cleaning the current is more like tending a garden, a continuous relationship between human care and natural processes. It is not about making the water perfect forever. It is about keeping it within a balance where life can thrive and resistance struggles to spread. Innovation on the horizon around the world. Researchers are experimenting with new approaches. Biochar filters made from plant waste, capable of trapping antibiotics in carbon pores. Algae-based systems that absorb and break down pharmaceutical chemicals while producing oxygen. Electrochemical reactors that use low-voltage currents to disrupt bacterial membranes and degrade drugs in seconds. These are not yet common. Many remain in trial phases, but each carries the hope that the future of cleaning might be faster, cheaper, and gentler on the world around it. Community-scale actions. Some of the most successful projects do not happen in large cities, but in small towns where people know the river by name. In these places, local councils, farmers, schools, and treatment plant managers meet regularly to share data, coordinate improvements, track progress. The river becomes a shared responsibility. Its health a reflection of the community itself. Change is slower here, but it is also deeper rooted in relationships as much as in technology. The river as a teacher. In the end, cleaning the current is as much about learning as it is about fixing. A river teaches patience. Its problems are centuries in the making and will not be undone in a season. It teaches humility. Even with our best machines, we cannot control every drop. And it teaches interconnectedness. The antibiotic in a hospital ward is the same one that may appear weeks later in a shellfish bed downstream. The river's lesson is clear. What we release into the world never truly leaves it. The hope in small wins, every gram of antibiotic removed, every resistant bacterium killed, is a small victory. It may not feel dramatic. There is no ribbon cutting for a filter upgrade, no applause for a reed bed. But these changes accumulate. A slightly cleaner outflow from one plant means less pressure on bacteria downstream. A single farm's composting system means fewer genes in the soil to wash into the next rainstorm. The river notices. And over years, those small wins can shape a different future. Cleaning the current is not about erasing the past. It is about protecting the water we have now and the water we will have tomorrow. The river will keep flowing, with or without us. The question is whether, when our turn is over, we leave it more burdened, or more free, or more free. The river does not rush to teach, it waits. Its lessons are written in slow currents, in the way water curls around stone, in the way life adapts to whatever flows through it. When you stand at the edge, you may think of yourself as a watcher, a separate observer, looking at something out there. But the longer you stay, the more you see that you are not separate at all. You are part of the same cycle, the same return, the same give and take. And when antibiotics flow into its veins, the river answers. Not out of malice, but simply because that is what life does. It adapts. It finds a way. The first humbling. We are not in control for decades. Human medicine has been built on the assumption that we could stay ahead. We invented penicillin, and for a while, it seemed like a shield that nothing could pierce. We found newer, stronger drugs and believed each would be a final answer. But nature has never played by the rules we write in laboratories. Bacteria do not read medical journals. They have no borders, no politics, no preference for rich or poor. When we pour antibiotics into the world, through hospitals, farms, factories, we are, in a way, teaching bacteria how to resist us. We give them the exam questions in advance, and they ace the test. The first humbling lesson is this: we are not the masters of life's code. We are simply one species among countless others negotiating for survival. The second humbling. Small does not mean weak. It is easy to underestimate what cannot be seen. A bacterium is smaller than the width of a human hair, yet it can reshape an entire hospital's capacity to heal. It can travel in a drop of water from a river in Yorkshire to a fish market in another country without anyone knowing. In the human imagination, strength is often linked to size, to the weight of armies, to the bulk of machines, to the scale of buildings. But here, the most powerful shift comes from something that fits into the space between the lines on a fingerprint. Humility grows. When you realize that the smallest beings often have the largest say in the shape of the world. The third humbling. The world does not reset for us when we make mistakes. We like to think we can simply fix them, erase the mark, start over, write a better ending. But in nature, there is no reset button. Once resistance genes exist, they cannot be unmade. Even if the bacteria carrying them die, their genetic instructions can be taken up by others. The river keeps its memory. A storm may wash away the foam, but in the quiet silt and the bent reeds at the bank, the imprint of what is past remains. This humbling is the hardest to know, that our actions carry forward in ways we cannot fully undo. When the river speaks back sometimes, the lesson arrives suddenly. A village hospital finds an infection that none of its medicines can treat. A farm loses an entire season's crop because the soil carries resistant bacteria from a nearby stream. A shellfish bed is closed, not from toxins, but from microbes that no longer respond to antibiotics. These moments are not punishments. They are the river speaking back, showing us that the currents we thought we controlled flow in both directions. Lessons. In shared vulnerability, there is a quiet kind of equality in the face of antibiotic resistance. It does not matter whether someone is wealthy or poor, urban or rural, young or old. A resistant infection does not ask for your passport before it begins its work. And yet, the impacts are not evenly felt. In places with fewer medical resources, the arrival of a resistant strain can turn a treatable illness into a crisis. In cities with high medical capacity, the same strain may mean a longer hospital stay, more expensive drugs, or the loss of certain treatments altogether. The river's humility here is in reminding us that our fates are linked, but our protections are not. And that imbalance is its own kind of danger. The danger of forgetting history shows that human attention is short. When a threat feels distant, we relax. When an illness seems solved, we move on to other concerns. But antibiotic resistance does not fade when headlines do. It grows in the background, in the quiet corners of rivers, in the shadows of hospital drains, in the damp warmth of soil after rain. Forgetting is a luxury the river cannot afford, and neither can we. Humility here means remembering Ativa, when the world would rather look away. Learning from those who came before assistance is not new. Long before humans made antibiotics, bacteria evolved to protect themselves from naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds made by fungi and other microbes. In a sense, We stepped into an ancient arms race without realizing how long it had been. Running. Indigenous communities, fishermen, farmers, many have long known that water is not simply clean or dirty, but carries a living memory of the land around it. They treat water sources with care rooted in generations of observation. Humility means listening to these voices, not assuming that technology alone will save us. The patience to change slowly. There is a temptation to want sweeping fixes. 1. Invention. 1 law. 1 global agreement that solves the problem overnight. But the river teaches a different rhythm. Its banks erode, grain by grain. Its channels shift over years. Its balance is restored by countless small acts, roots holding soil, stones slowing the current, floods replenishing nutrients. In our fight against resistance, the same truth applies. Progress will come from many small measures, layered and sustained over time. Better waste treatment here, reduced antibiotic use there, okay? Public awareness slowly spreading. Humility is walking at that pace without losing heart, accepting that nature will always have the last move. We can and must adapt our practices, invent better safeguards, treat antibiotics as treasures rather than conveniences. But nature is vast. Life is endlessly inventive. No matter how carefully we close the doors, some bacteria will find a window. Humility does not mean surrender. It means preparing for the truth that we will never win in the final sense. The relationship will always be a negotiation, and perhaps that is what it should be, not domination, coexistence. While humility is a form of strength, there is power in recognizing limits. When we know what we cannot control, we can focus on what we can change. Humility invites collaboration. It allows scientists to work with farmers, engineers with ecologists, citizens with policymakers, not in competition, but in shared purpose. In this way, humility is not a weakness. It is the foundation for resilience. The river's final lesson. If the river could speak in words, perhaps it would say, I am older than your medicines, and I will be here after them. I carry the weight of your choices and the seeds of your survival. Treat me as an enemy, and I will teach you how to lose. Treat me as a partner, and I will carry you further than you imagine. The lesson is simple, but not easy. We are not separate from the systems we try to manage. Every cure we invent, every waste we discard, flows back to us in time. Humility, in the end, is simply seeing that truth and living by it. Asterisk, good night, good night.